In a world where GPS and radar have made seafaring a far safer and more accessible undertaking, it's sometimes easy to forget that for countless years, humans sailed the harsh oceans with little to guide them. Well, first they navigated by stars, later they developed sextants and compasses, and gradually, bit by bit, we made discoveries that allowed us to really open up the world via the sea. One of the aids and landmarks that we relied on from earlier than you'd expect are lighthouses. When we think of them now, we think of towering feats of engineering, kitted out with high-tech lenses and powerful lights to spread their potentially life-saving brightness distances that would be unimaginable just a few generations ago. While almost all of them are automated in modern ages, we don't have to go too far back in time before these remote structures were manned by, well, men. Men as rugged and tough as the job that they did, living in relative isolation for extended periods of time, giving up their time and occasionally their sanity to ensure the safety of others traversing the waves. Especially in an age before our instant communication, the remote nature of these jobs and their isolation from the rest of the world has lent itself to both tragedy and mystery. And for one of the most famous mysteries today, we are headed over to Bonnie, Scotland. If you ever find yourself in Scotland, the best wee country in the world, there are few that would argue that the Highlands and the Islands are something very special. They may be remote and they may be relatively sparsely populated, and they have some of the harshest weather, but they are also home to the most stunning natural beauty that the country has to offer. Sweeping glens, towering hills, rivers, beaches, and waterfalls, there is something around every corner when you venture out in the back and beyond. Just remember to bring your jacket and probably some midge repellent. If you fancied visiting any of the islands off the coast, you might as well start with the Outer Hebrides, also known as the Western Isles. They are located to the, you guessed it, west of Scotland and the various islands that make it up and have a total population of just under 30,000. The largest and most populous of these islands is the Isle of Lewis, which is home to nearly 20,000 of these people. Steeped in history, it is here that the Lewis chessmen were found, thought to be from the 12th century. That's the standing stones at Callanish as well as the Broche in Carloway, a ruin thought to be over 2,000 years old. And also, bear with me, believe it or not, I'm not Scottish, I'm American, so I might not be pronouncing those exactly correctly. But some of the traditional style black houses have been restored to a modern standard and serve as a holiday accommodation for those who want to experience history with up-to-date amenities. As with all islands, there is a strong seafaring tradition here. Many earned and earn their living from the water that surrounds them on all sides, pulling up lobster and fishing in the choppy waters. And while there is a lighthouse at the butt of Lewis, and no laughing the back, it's just the most northerly point, we're looking at 17 nautical miles out into the brutal Atlantic, into the uninhabited Flannan Isles. The Flannan Isles are a set of rocky land masses that sit out in the freezing Atlantic Ocean, fully exposed to the extreme weather conditions that it can offer. While their location, lack of easy access, and extreme weather have left them generally unsuitable for permanent human occupation, there were small groups of men who worked there for a period. These were the keepers that tended to the lighthouse. The lighthouse was the Eilean Mor, or Gaelic for Big Island, and was a feat of engineering in and of itself. Constructed between 1895 and 1899, it stood 23 meters high, or around 69 feet high, nice, with a light that was visible from up to 20 nautical miles. As well as keeping unwitting vessels from dashing themselves to pieces against the craggy islands, it served as a solid landmark for passing ships, letting them pinpoint exactly how close they were to the Western Isles and dry land. While the lighthouse was being built, there were a number of other amenities added to the Eilean Mor to make it suitable for permanent occupation. Some landing areas were installed on both the east and west faces where supply vessels and relief boats could dock. Here, they had somewhere to drop off goods and personnel, letting them make their way onto the island. Due to how steep the inclines were from the landing areas to the lighthouse, they also added a railway of sorts. Nothing on any grand scale, but a fairly impressive undertaking for the time. There was a steam engine installed in the building that allowed a cart to be dragged by chain up these railway sleepers, making transport of the provisions and fuel easier for the keepers. In addition, they also had a crane at each landing area that assisted with unloading goods and transporting them onto the cart. Remnants of the track remain in Flannan Isles to this day and can still be seen. Between the lighthouse, the railway, and all associated machinery, by the time construction completed in mid-1899, the total cost of the project was equivalent to more than £200,000 today, nearly around $250,000. The lighthouse and others like it were commissioned by the Northern Lighthouse Board, who had a responsibility for all lighthouses in Scotland. The Northern Lighthouse Board was founded in 1786, initially formed to handle the construction of major lighthouses around Scotland due to a severe lack of them. Once the construction was completed, they bore responsibility for all lighthouses in Scotland and also, weirdly, the Isle of Man. This organization still exists to this day, and while its days of organizing relief and supplies to remote manned locations are long gone, they still bear the responsibility for the maintenance and upkeep of all lighthouses in the country. Historically, it had been two-man teams that managed a lighthouse, but this was increased to a minimum of 3 following what became known as the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy. There were 2 keepers who worked the 41-meter lighthouse, constructed in 1861 some 20 miles off the coast of Wales, United Kingdom, and the pair were known to not always get along very well, to say the least. The 2 men were both called Thomas Griffith and Thomas Howell. While they were manning the lighthouse, Griffith died in what has been described as a freak accident. Howell knew that people were aware the pair quarreled often and was worried that it would look like he had taken his co-worker's life. So instead, he decided to build a coffin, put Griffith in it, and tie it up outside their accommodation, exposed to the elements. The coffin soon came to pieces and the limbs of the deceased Thomas flailed around. Although he was now working alone, Howell managed to keep up with his duties and ensure the light never went out. When relief finally arrived, Thomas Howell was a shell of his former self from the stress of the ordeal. There was no record of him being arrested or charged, so it can only be presumed that his effort to preserve his companion's body and struggle through the rest of the deployment proved that it was more of a tragedy than a murder. Following this, the standard became that there would be 3 men manning each lighthouse at all times. This would not only provide redundancy and backup should someone fall ill or pass away, but it would provide a second man to confirm any incidents or accidents that happened when they were located so far away from rest of society. A 4th relief keeper would rotate them out and provide them with shore leave and time off. Supplies were brought along by vessel along with any crew changeout. In 1900, like literally 1900, towards the end of the year, the 3 lighthouse keepers on Flannan Isles were James Ducat, a 41-year-old and the principal lighthouse keeper, Donald MacArthur, a 40-year-old occasional lighthouse keeper, there to provide the cover for William Ross, who was a first assistant, and a 28-year-old named Thomas Marshall, the second assistant. On the evening of December 15, 1900, a vessel named Arctur was passing the Flannan Isles en route to Leith, Edinburgh from America when it noted the light was not lit. While the weather was not great, they were well within range of the light and all of their calculations showed their position to be accurate. When they docked at Leith, they made a report regarding the problem. The LLB were informed at this time. The relief vessel Hesperus was due to provide relief to the keepers on the 20th of December, but was held in port because of a severe storm that was blowing in, probably the tail end of the rough weather that the Arctur had reported when she spotted the light being out. By the time the wind and waves had subsided enough and Hesperus was able to make its crossing, it was now Boxing Day, December 26th. The first thing they noticed was that the flag was not raised on the flagstaff as it would have been expected. Secondly, there were no supply boxes sitting in the landing area waiting to be refilled. And thirdly, and most worrying of all, none of the keepers were down at the landing area to greet them. The master or captain of the Hesperus, Jim Harvey, tried a number of times to get a response from the lighthouse keepers. He let out a number of short blasts on the ship whistle to no effect. He even fired off a flare or a rocket and no movement was seen. Following this, he made the decision to lower a boat with the relief keeper, Joseph Moore, and a few others to make for the landing area and investigate. While the storm had largely passed, conditions were still rough, and it took a while for the men to secure the small boat to the landing area. Joseph jumped onto land and went up alone to try to find his colleagues. Nothing seemed to miss the east landing where he had jumped off, so he went up the hill towards the lighthouse. The gate was closed, as was the main door. Still not seeing anyone, he made his way into the building itself, and here is where the feeling that something was far wrong probably began to build for more. He checked the sleeping quarters and found them empty, but the beds unmade, as though they had simply vanished somewhere between getting up and going to bed. The fire showed signs that it hadn't been lit in days, and the clock that needed regular winding had stopped. After his brief initial search, he hurried back to the boat and they made their way back onto the Hesperus to report to Captain Harvey that the men were nowhere to be seen and something was wrong. Jim Harvey ordered Joseph Moore back onto shore in order to conduct a full search along with a few other sailors. The search turned up no answers and only more questions. There was a set of oilskins and sea boots still hung up inside the lighthouse, meaning that at least one of the men went out without his protective clothing on. They searched the west landing and found some extensive damage, but no sign of the keepers. The daily tasks required to get the light on had been completed, meaning that whatever had happened must have been during some time during the day. The kitchen was tidied and all dishes were put away neatly, meaning they had already eaten their meal. Perplexed, they returned to the Hesperus, where the captain sent a message on shore to inform the authorities of what they had found. In the meantime, he sent Joseph Moore back onto land, but this time with 3 men who volunteered to assist him with the lighthouse keeper duties until suitable replacements were found. While there were only normally 3 men required, we can assume the extra man was due to their lack of experience and duties and to assist with additional searches in the meantime. The captain's message explained, "Have left Moore, McDonald, the buoy master, and 2 seamen on the island to keep the light burning until you make other arrangements." In his own letter explaining what he found when he arrived, Joseph Moore would name the other 2 men who stayed with him as A. Lamont and A. Campbell. When the NLB were informed, they sent the superintendent Robert Muirhead to conduct a full investigation and arrange permanent cover. Until full-time cover could be arranged, Muirhead dispatched the head keeper from another lighthouse and an assistant storekeeper named John Milne and Donald Jack, both of Lewis, to assist Moore. As with any mysterious and sudden event, there were plenty of theories offered, mainly by those who didn't have full facts. In fact, this is what would keep humans alive all throughout history. It's kind of a known thing with us that if we don't know specifically what happened, our brain will go to the most astronomical horrors imaginable to explain what happened. Because what it does is it helps us actually survive difficult things. Like, let's say you have 2 passes in front of you, one goes across a saber-toothed den and the other doesn't. If nobody ever returns from the saber-toothed den path and you don't know what's out there, lots of stories will actually form because nobody knows what's out there, nobody wants to go check, so usually it'll cause people to conjure up a monster when it's just something completely natural. But some of the more outrageous were that a sea serpent actually, again conjuring monsters, may have taken them in some non-specified way. Similarly, a large bird may have swooped down and gotten all 3 men, again by methods unknown. There was talk of passing spies and some description accosting them, or even that they had reasons unknown deliberately arranged for a vessel to come pick them up and spirit them away. Some, maybe with the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy on their mind, proposed that one of the keepers with a bit of a temper had fought one or both of the others and all 3 had fallen into the sea. And bearing in mind that some of the people on Lewis believed in the blue men of the Minch, supernatural creatures that patrolled that stretch of water between Lewis and the mainland, there were some that thought more sinister forces were actually at work here. Some even thought that maybe a ghost ship or some vessel of a lost soul came back and took them in. These tall tales and wild speculations weren't helped by significant embellishments to the story. Whether deliberate or not, some more fanciful elements began to be added. Things like meals being found uneaten sitting on the table, or an upturned chair, as though something sudden had occurred. Some made mention of an alleged logbook entry which referred to one of the keepers crying and all 3 men praying as the storm raged around them. The official investigation found the last entry to be on the 15th of December and was fairly pedestrian in nature. It's also difficult to imagine seasoned and experienced lighthouse keepers weeping while safe in a structure specifically designed to withstand storms. The reports of both Moore and Muirhead paint the picture of the exact damage that was found to the landings and equipment of the island. In a letter that Joseph Moore wrote on December 28th, he made the following comments explaining not only the damage to the West Landing area and associated gear, but the extreme height that some of his equipment was located at. Nothing appears to be touched at each landing to show that they were taken from there. Ropes are all in their respective places in the shelter, just as they were left after the relief on the 7th. On the west side, it is somewhat different. We had an old box halfway up the railway for holding West Landing mooring ropes and tackle, and it's gone. Some of the ropes, it appears, got washed out of it, and they lie strewn on the rocks near the crane. The crane itself is safe. The iron railings along the passage connecting railway with the footpath to the landing and started from their foundation and broken in several places. Also, railing around crane and handrails for making mooring rope fast for boat is entirely carried away. Now, there is nothing to give us an indication that it was there the poor men lost their lives, only that Mr. Marshall has his sea boots on and oilskins. Also, Mr. Duquette has his sea boots on. He had no oilskin, only an old waterproof coat, and that is away. Donald MacArthur has his wearing coat left behind him, which shows, as far as I know, that he went out in shirt sleeves. He never used any other coat on previous occasions, only the one I am referring to. Muirhead pretty much agreed with the narrative as explained by Relief Keeper Moore. The only extra details he added were the last entry on the slate was by Mr. Duquette on Saturday, 15th of December. This entry indicated that all the day's work had been completed, and judging by the ready state of the light and associated equipment, they were good to go. Along with the kitchen being tidied, he believed this showed the event occurred in the afternoon. The crane was in order, secured, and no evidence that it was being used or had been utilized. This crane was 70 feet up, and the carnage of twisted and bent railings another 40 feet above that. This is enormous damage evident by more than 100 feet above sea level. A massive rock had been washed downhill a decent distance, and a life buoy that was normally tied to the railing was not there. While he initially considered that it may have been used, giving more evidence that someone went overboard, he discovered that it had been torn from the railing rather than untied or deployed. He also dismissed the idea of them being blown away due to the prevailing direction of that day. They would have been blown inland rather than out to sea. All evidence pointed to the fact that there were heavy seas coming over as high as this on the west side, a truly huge set of waves. The state of dress of the first two keepers made him think that they were headed towards the landing area, perhaps to secure further equipment, fully insulated from the extreme weather by oilskins and sea boots. A leading theory is that two of the men were working to secure some equipment on the far side of the island. The third keeper, the one who was supposed to stay in the lighthouse, saw something that caused him to run out to assist. It is possible that the damage to the storage boxes could have been caused by a rogue wave. These are waves thought impossible to science until very recently, notably higher and more powerful than others in the sea because of constructive interference. Essentially, when two waves run into each other, it can create a bigger wave. If a monstrous wall of water came crashing over the island with enough force to bend steel railings and smash boxes to bits, the two men must have rushed out to salvage and secure what they could, leaving at least one in the lighthouse, as was required. It's possible that the third man either saw a more huge wave approaching and rushed to warn them, or saw one or both of them swept into the freezing Atlantic and tried to assist. Either way, for some unknown reason, he abandoned his post and did so without even putting on his jacket or oilskins, a veritable suicide for any sort of heavy weather. The official report by Muirhead made the following conclusion. I am of the opinion that the most likely explanation of the disappearance of the men is that they have all gone down on the afternoon of Saturday, the 15th of December, to the proximity of the West Landing to secure the box with mooring ropes, etc., and that an unexpectedly large roller had come up on the island, and a large body of water going up higher than where they were and coming down on them had swept them away with resistless force. Seeing as this is probably the most likely occurrence, it turns out that the captain of the Hesperus relief vessel probably reached the correct conclusion in his initial message, before any sort of investigation had even occurred. His message is quoted as saying, "Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that." In our modern era, automation is almost universal when it comes to lighthouses. There's simply no need anymore for men to put their lives and sanity at risk the way they did for so many years. In the case of the Flannan Isles mystery, all we are left with are best guesses. Whether you choose to believe that they were gobbled up by sea monsters unknown to science and nature, or possibly even accosted by ghosts. Whether you think that they just spirited themselves away, or whether you think they were simply victims of extreme weather and the incredible power of nature, there is always going to be intrigue around the Flannan Isles and the three men that disappeared on the night of 1900. Well, anyhow, what are you guys for watching? If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be fantastic, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I will go ahead and tell you, we now know there are 100-foot rogue waves that do happen in that area. They've been spotted by oil rigs that are out there that are floating on the surface of the water. So it can definitely happen, and sometimes these rogue waves can come in 2 or 3. So if that first line of water or wall of water hit them and knocked them the first 2 out, and that guy went to help, he probably got too in the same exact way. But I want to also thank my patrons real quick at the Literal Wendigo tier. We have Grayson West. Thank you, sir. Also, at the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Mushroom Dance, and the first-hand accounts, Beaver Malaga. Yes, and at the second-hand accounts, we have Kanan Johnson, Justice Davis, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keep the channel running and is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.